Hello there. This week's Convex Conversation is with a great friend of mine, a well-known TV face and much-loved radio voice. Journalist Penny Smith brought the news to us every morning for the best part of 2 decades on ITV's breakfast show GMTV. She was the launch presenter of Sky News. She shares her passion for classical music and opera on the radio with beginners like me and aficionados. She currently hosts Weekend Breakfast on Talk, presents on Scala, and has done all sorts of other interesting stuff. Penny, thanks so much for joining us today. How are you? Yeah, absolutely fine. Talking on one of those remote studios as we've all got used to. Yes, by the seaside though. there is that. I'll never forget the first time we met Penny. It was late 80s. Obviously, you were only 5 at the time. Mm-hmm. You walked into. I was 37 for such a long time. You stuck at 37 for such a long time. I remember you walked into the Sky newsroom. You were wearing a bowler hat and DMs, looking a bit like something out of Clockwork Orange. And I remember thinking, wow, she looks great fun. And how right I was. You've had a great sense of style, haven't you, throughout your career, Pen? Well, I don't know about a sense of style. It's my mum always used to say, whenever she used to see me going out, she used to say, interesting. I think that's the point. And it's so funny now because I look back on it and I've always been interested in sewing and making things and dyeing things and making do and mending, that sort of thing. And I remember getting a written warning at the Peterborough Evening Telegraph. I'd had 2 spoken warnings already and a written warning about what I wore. And the editor called me in before giving me the written warning. And I was wearing a tablecloth that I'd made into a dress, a pair of stripy socks, clogs, and a whole load of beads. And I thought I looked as cool as a cucumber, obviously. And he said, listen, genuinely, how would you feel if I asked you to go and interview the Queen today? And I said, I'd be thrilled and excited. Genuinely thinking that this might be on the cards. And he said, no, he said, nothing. He said, no. He said, no, look at you. Look at what you're wearing. This is not what I expect from my reporters. And I looked down and I thought, I'm clean. I'm tidy. I think I'm looking interesting. I think I'm wearing a perfectly reasonable outfit. And nothing much has changed, really, has it? Because a year or 2 ago, you were a bit short of a sequined little number for the Costa Book Awards that you were hosting. And didn't you run yourself up something then? I did. I sewed my own sequins. And, dear listener, never again. Because months later, I was still finding sequins in the soup. They were everywhere. I broke 3 sewing needles on my sewing machine. It got me so frustrated. I got so hot and bothered. It was a lovely dress, but every time I look at it, I feel pain. Oh, and Mum must be thrilled that you're doing a bit of dressmaking, because she made your clothes when you were growing up, didn't she, or some of them? She did. She made a lot of our clothes. So when you see me and my sister were wearing tabards, they were white and black spotty, and they went with us onto the beach because they had big pockets at the front, which was extraordinarily useful. I love a pocket. I don't think there are enough dresses with pockets. I don't think there are enough jackets with inside pockets for women. I think pockets are brilliant because it means you don't have to carry a handbag. Pockets are brilliant, and you like a bit of a flared sleeve like me too, don't you? Oh, yeah, very fine item, a flared sleeve, yeah. Now, when Sky began, you were already an established broadcaster. What was it like launching Britain's first ever satellite news channel? Do you know what? I don't think I've ever been quite so nervous. Apart from my very first ever broadcast, I was on Radio Hong Kong, and my very first broadcast, the red light went on, and my first words to Radio Hong Kong were, hello? At which point, somebody the other side of the glass shouted at me. I could see them shouting, and I pressed on. But yes, it was really nerve-wracking because it felt so... Well, of course, nothing like that had been done, or certainly nothing that I'd launched, for goodness sake. And I say I had launched. I was with a co-presenter, Alistair Yates, and the 2 of us were sitting there, and they decided, it was an evening as well, even though he and I were both doing the breakfast show, and we did the breakfast show together for many years. But they decided to give a flavour of it. And I had the most hideous hair because it was all boofy because the water didn't work, and I was planning on washing my hair there at the studio and then having it all coiffed. Unfortunately, the water wasn't working, so my hair, which is generally incredibly well behaved, was as flat as a pancake, probably because we were a bit hot and sweaty, to be fair. And then you look at it now, and of course it was so 80s. We had flying buttresses for shoulder pads, massive earrings, the rest of it. And then it was surprisingly smooth.
Well, we've dug through the archives and found a dusty old clip from that very first programme. You'll be relieved that this is audio only, being a podcast, Pen, so we're not going to see your hair on this. But let's have a listen.
Good evening. You're watching the World News from Sky Television News on the hour, every hour.
And our first story this evening, 10 Britons have agreed to sell their kidneys for cash to a German cant who plans to set up an organ transplant business here. In an exclusive interview with Sky News at his home near Stuttgart, Count Rainier Edelman said the donors would have surgery in Paris and be paid £20,000 each.
Mrs Thatcher has ordered her ministers to look into how to stop the kidneys for sale trade, which she described as absolutely abhorrent. But Count Edelman told Sky News that he'll carry on his business come what may. We can also reveal the Count is currently under investigation over an alleged illegal immigration ring. From Germany, Richard Ellis.
The small, sleepy...
I remember I was standing in the newsroom when you went to air next to Rupert Murdoch, of all people, and I remember feeling nervous for you. I mean, gosh, I can't imagine how you felt as the titles rolled with seconds to go. Did you have butterflies and moths in your stomach?
I think I did. I absolutely remember feeling breathless and convulsively swallowing as the titles were rolling. And then as soon as it happened, that was it. Kicked in all those years of broadcasting on radio and television. I'd been at Border Television and Thames News. So at that point, it just felt comfortable by then.
They were groundbreaking times. I remember my grandfather was very old at the time, and he was the first person in Grimsby, my hometown, to get a satellite dish because, none of us really had satellite dishes. It really was quite a special time, wasn't it, to launch something so different.
And also now we're used to rolling news, but then we weren't. And of course we had if you remember, we were scratching around quite often for anything to fill those 24 hours. What can we do? Who can we talk to? And as I said, now it seems odd that we even worried about how we were going to fill all those hours, but we did. Who can we talk to? And so therefore we did interviews with people that we would not necessarily have done, and certainly not working in news as we had done, where you're really working for maximum an hour show, where it's all about you have your morning meeting, you talk about what's going into the show, and then there was always something that could hang over that didn't absolutely need to go out that day. There were no time constraints. I remember at Thames News, there was a little package that sat there and sat there and sat there, to the extent that we had to phone up and just check that the dog was still alive and that they still lived at the same house, because it had been so long that it had been sitting there waiting to go. And there was none of that on Sky. It was all hands to the pump. We needed as much as we could.
24-hour news is such a good discipline. I think once you can host rolling breaking news from all over the world, it really does prepare you for anything, doesn't it, Penny?
Oh, wasn't it so brilliant? The amount of times that you'd be presenting as the news was unfurling, it was thrilling. As a journalist, it doesn't get much more at the cutting edge than that. A, we were breaking boundaries, and B, you're breaking news, and you're breaking news as it happens, and you're not having to go to any other programs. You're not having to say, we're going to cut away and go to a drama now that you're waiting for. We can just press on. And there were no time constraints. It was an adrenaline surge. And having to fill, as you know, sometimes having to fill for minutes on end before you got to the next interviewee. And this was at a time, of course, when the internet wasn't as speedy as it is now. People were handing you bits of paper with the information on it. And luckily, you almost always had a co-host. So you would talk to each other. And the more information you had, the more you knew, the better it was, which is then when you suddenly realise that having done so many things in my life, if you've been to somewhere, you can say, having been to that country, I know this. And that just gives everybody more of a vision, more of a view into what is happening where it is.
And were there any events, Penny, that particularly stood out? I know that's always a tricky question because you were on Sky for years. So I'm sure, actually, if we sat down and thought about it, there must be lots of major events that you were talking us all through on air.
Yeah.
But anything when you look back in your sort of Sky bit in your mind that you think, oh, my goodness, that was such an amazing day?
Well, when you say an amazing day, I think the Gulf War obviously was the big news at that particular time. That was extraordinary. when we do stories about war, sometimes we don't think enough about the humans to whom it is happening. We think of one side and the other side. We talk about numbers, and it's only when it comes down to one person that you properly think about the effects of this. I remember when I was at GMTV with John Stapleton, and John was out in Bosnia, and he was talking to this man who had all his possessions on a piece of equipment that churns up earth, but it was like a rotavator, that sort of a thing. As he was talking to him, it fell off and it fell into the ditch. It was just beyond, it was everything. It was, this is what I am reduced to, and now my belongings are in the ditch. And it reminds you of the human cost of these conflicts. As I said, I think sometimes when we talk in figures, we say this many dead or whatever. You don't really connect. It's a number, it's a figure, and most people are not very good at thinking. And I would say myself, and I don't know about you, but, you know, when you get asked how many people are at the demonstration, I just think, I don't know, it's really squashed, it's cheek by jowl. I have no concept of how many people that is. And until somebody puts it into perspective for you, the size of a football field, the size of whatever, that's one thing. And then the other way is to bring it all down to how we would feel in that situation.
Of course, Penny, being on stations like Sky News and then GMTV for the best part of, 17 years, I think.
My goodness, you could grow a sizable human being in that time, couldn't you?
You could, and she's still only 37. Actually, I do remember when he used to go off trekking, which we'll talk about later. And I remember you always used to phone the press office before you went and said, don't worry, if anything happens to me bad when I'm on my trek, just remember I was 37. So I'm now officially older than you. But being on those programmes, and, you know, I was lucky enough to follow you as well to GMTV, so I speak from personal experience too. I feel we've had this front row seat, Penny, at events that have happened all over the world, both as reporters and presenters. And that's an honour, but it comes with a great responsibility as well when you're the newsreader or the news presenter, doesn't it?
It does, to get it right and to try to report it as well as even-handedly as possible. I mean, I remember when you were there when the Twin Towers came down. And again, really, all you want to say is, oh, no. But you have to be able to speak. You have to be able to describe what is happening, describe what has happened, and find out information, because we do need to put these things into context as well. What's going on in the wider world? Why is this happening? Why could it be happening? What happens next? The usual questions that we get drummed into when we train as journalists, the 7 questions, the why, what, where, when, who, why, etc. They're drilled into you for a very good reason. It's so that when something happens which is unexpected, your journalist brain kicks in and you are looking at it, obviously as a human, but also as a reporter of what is going on, as the reporter of what you can see.
You have, I'm sure our listeners will realise this already, but you have a wonderful sense of humour. What about the funny times at GMTV? Because obviously while you did straight news at GMTV, there's also the more magazine side of it and showbizy side to it. Were there any really rib-achingly funny moments with John Stapleton or your other co-presenters?
Well, the thing about John was that John and I were still great, great friends and will be friends forever. And we used to giggle a lot. So when he used to throw to the weather, and particularly if it was Claire Nazir, who's another mate, when Claire was on, he used to go down after we'd organised who was mostly interviewing somebody, because that's how it kind of worked, is that somebody mostly interviewed one person and somebody would join, and we'd nudge each other as, could I have a question now? And it was very much give and take. But the link to the weather, I often used to slightly sabotage before we went down. And he would hesitate as he saw the autocue coming up. And my particular favourite one was when it was very, very cold. And I made him, I didn't make him, but he read the words out, which was how cold it was. And then he said, Claire, do I need my legs lagging for winter? And for some reason, it just set us off for the morning. But they were just things that he would never have said. And I don't know why it amused me, because he'd roll his eyes and go, will you stop it? In that way that you do when you've got an slightly irritating child hanging about. I remember co-hosting with Eamon Holmes, and I remember doing this item about the best behaved dogs, and they came to me, and the dogs had been so good until they came to me. And Eamon threw to me and said, Penny's with the dogs right now. Are they being well behaved? And I said, they are indeed, at which point they all started barking and attacking each other. And that was also quite a moment. And that was a moment. And of course, we also had famous people that we interviewed because they were promoting films or whatever. And I always salute Sybil Shepherd, because she came in and she got her hair in a kind of band. And I said, so the reason for the band, by the way, I don't think I've seen you wearing that sort of thing. She said, I'm having such a bad hair day. And she whipped it off and her hair was all over the place. She looked like she'd been licked by gorillas. It was standing up. It was going left, right and all the way. She was such fun to interview. It doesn't matter in some ways whether at the end of it you've got all the information out that they came on to talk about. If you're sitting at home in your pyjamas waiting to get on with your day, sometimes you just need a giggle.
You certainly do. And breakfast TV, you certainly need a giggle because the hours are brutal. Share with us your rather unusual way of dealing with many, many years of 4 a.m. starts 5 days a week.
Well, I used to sleep twice a day. So I got up at 4 and then obviously into the studio where you'd get the faxes before. My goodness, faxes.
Faxes?
Yes,
what
I know.
Are we talking about Penny Smith?
It's a long time ago.
I'm sure there weren't faxes in my day.
I'm sure it was faxes. You used to get them on the printer.
You're right, it was. They did used to fax.
They used to fax them through. And then, so that was the night before. So you'd swat up. So I'd come home from the theatre. That was the reason why I had to do 2 sleeps a day, because otherwise I never got to do the thing that I love so much, which is go to the theatre and the opera. So I would get home at about, 10:30, 11, and then start reading my briefs so that I was all ready for the show the next day. And then, of course, read a bit more in the car on the way in. And luckily, those brilliant makeup artists who'd make me turn from a turkey into a peacock, maybe. Although obviously not a female peacock because they're a bit drab. So I'm not quite sure that...
I think they turned into a male peacock, I think. There's a whole different conversation there. Let's
the whole thing is... Just move that to one side. And sometimes these metaphors just don't work. Anyway, there they were waiting. And so that was brilliant because they could make you look so much better. And also I am terrible at doing my own makeup. Still am, will always be. I'm just not very good. I didn't wear makeup very much until I was 28 when I went into border television and started to have to wear it. So to come back to that, so I'd then go to bed after the show at about 10, 11 in the morning and sleep until the afternoon and then get up and go out. Also, it meant that I had to be really careful about A, alcohol, and B, eating, and make sure that I was really eating well. And so consequently, when you started at GMTV, it was even easier because we decided to start Soup Club. So we'd have breakfast soup.
Soup Club was amazing. I mean, come 7:30 when you work in breakfast TV, it feels like lunchtime. We used to take it in turns to make various soups, and we got complaints from the staff about the smell of like boiled cabbage emanating from the dressing room. But it was really good fun. And I remember asking you once, in the early days of me being there with you, I said to you, did you go out last night? And you said to me, never ask that. Just ask, where did you go last night? Because you really did. You were at the theatre or opera or at a music event, or perhaps there was a premiere or a film or a dinner or a charity thing or hosting awards every night. And that sleep pattern, you really made it work for you, along with I remember you giving me, I think it was a 12-minute routine that you said I had to get into at that time of day, because you can't waste minutes when your alarm goes off at 4 a.m, can you?
No, I could virtually shower and get dressed and clean my teeth all at the same time. Yeah, 12-minute routine. That was all it needed, because the longer you sleep, every 15 minutes at that time in the morning somehow feels like an hour if you're talking about getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning or even 7:30. And in fact, anything after 5:45, I think, is the latest where it feels normal. Anything before that, it feels like it's the middle of the night. And when I was at Sky, I was getting up at 3, 5 days a week. And that is when I discovered yoga, actually. Yoga was superb for keeping me in, I was going to say keeping me in shape. It's not really about keeping you in shape. It's about keeping you supple, keeping you well, making sure that you sleep well. So the whole thing really became something of a mission to make me feel less terrible about getting up so early in the morning.
And Penny, GMTV in its heyday had more than 2 million viewers, I think. Presumably you were recognised a lot more on the street than you were in the early days of Sky. How have you found that? I mean, I'm sure it's something you're very used to now, but it must have been quite strange at first, was it?
The first time that you get noticed, it will always be the oddest. Although, funny enough, working at Border Television, I was instantly famous in Cumbria.
I kept thinking of the peacock metaphor. It was all going wrong in my head.
Big pilchard in a small tin, small pilchard in a big tin. And
quite like
so there are those who complain about fame, but I would always say it is quite difficult, because in that case, you kind of think, well, you shouldn't really be in a job where that is really going to annoy you, because it does come with the territory. And also, in the vast majority of cases, it's brilliant. You know, who wouldn't want to be invited to exciting events, for goodness sake?
And people are lovely on the street, aren't they, generally, when they recognise you from the telly?
Yeah, exactly. Although I do remember meeting somebody at the interval in the opera, and this guy saying to me, "Oh, you're the woman of Sky News, only you look so much chunkier on the television." And I said, "Chunkier? Really?" And he said, "Well, you know, plumper. Fatter, you know, that larger, yes, you look much larger on the television." And I said, "Oh, good. Didn't know I looked that large. Anyway, okay, fine, thank you very much." Anyway, he wrote me a letter. He said, "I'm sorry." He said, "I just meant that you do look a lot heftier." or maybe the words I was using weren't right. I meant a bit heftier. So it's really not working.
We need to file him, don't we? Yes, he's dug himself well and truly in a hole. I do want to talk about radio in a minute, Penny, because you're doing a lot on the radio, and I want to talk about your love of music and opera and everything. But I just thought we'd have a little bit of fun, because when I was, I don't have to do much research on you, but when I was doing a little bit of looking around in the cuttings, I found a really nice piece about the 5 things Penny Smith can't live without. And it made me laugh, because it really is you. So let's just romp through this. Let's start with carrots. Discuss.
Oh, carrots. Oh, what a jaunty little animal is a carrot. I always have travel carrots. Carrots are, well, apart from anything else, orange. Lovely. Such a happy colour. Plus, they're delicious, unless you get a really bad one, of course. But I would say never buy a pre-packaged carrot in terms of ready to eat. They're never right. There's the lovely snap, gives your teeth a workout, and it gives you a tan after a while. You have to be careful not to eat too many. A doctor friend of mine did look at the palms of my hands. I'm looking at them right now to check whether I've eaten too many carrots, and I think I'm okay. But she looked at my hands and said, "My goodness, you're overdoing it." And I said, "No, really, I'm not." And she said, "Okay, tell me the last week. How many times have you had carrots?" Well, I said, "Well, I have carrots every day, but..." "Oh, yeah, no, I have been eating carrot juice." "Oh, yeah, and I have had carrot soup quite a lot."
You realise this isn't why you're on camera today. We thought, oh, gosh, better do a podcast. She's so orange.
So orange.
Parker pen.
Oh, my dad's Parker pen that he gave me. And Dad, no longer with us. I always salute him. Hello, Dad. And he gave me this Parker pen after I passed the 11 plus. And it's a really nice pen to write with. I still have my Quink, and I do like to write with an ink pen. There are people who've started to call me out and say that really I'm so ancient now that I probably do quill and parchment or chisel on stone. But I really like my Parker pen, and it makes me happy. It's a connection.
It's a connection, and I think there's nothing quite like writing with ink. I write with ink, even with disposable fountain pens sometimes. And we do share a love of stationery, although yours is much more expensive than mine.
I don't know about that. It used to be.
We do like stationery, don't we? Rubber gloves.
Oh, rubber gloves. Yep. I don't even touch, if you've noticed, every time I give you a hug, always wearing rubber gloves when I give you a hug. And I just don't think you can do washing up without having rubber gloves.
It's more than that, though, isn't it? You are a self-confessed neat freak, aren't you? Because if I pop round to see you, I know after a few minutes I can feel getting anxious that I might be making the place look a little bit untidy.
My dad used to say that he couldn't stay with me in the flat because he just said, "I know that I'm sitting untidily," and he said, "I know I'll get stuck in a cupboard." So I do like to tidy. I am the person who has a number of brushes to clean into difficult corners. My radiators, you can look down the back of them. They're not dusty. There are no cobwebs. Yeah, just yes, exactly.
Just a few carrots.
Yeah, little collection of carrots in the corner. But yeah, there is something incredibly satisfying about looking around and thinking, can't be improved. I remember once being asked, I don't know whether you're thinking about having a deep clean at any stage. And I said, "No, thank you. That's very kind. No, won't be doing that." unnecessary.
Lined walking trousers. This is one of my favourites.
Oh, yes. Now, we all know from when we're young, and particularly if you grew up, I grew up in the countryside, and sometimes I didn't want to walk the dog. There were 4 of us, to be fair, to walk the dog. We all liked walking, and sometimes it would be really horrible, wet, miserable, cold outside. No, I don't want to take the dog for a walk, because of course we all developed that voice at about the age of 13, 14. And Mum would just say, no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing, go and put some more clothes on. And off you'd go. And in those days, I would have been wearing my hockey wind cheater and possibly my hockey type, the trousers you put on in just before you got to go and, get to the pitch and everything. And so you'd put all those things on and they would be in layers. Well, then as a massive hiker, and I love a jolly good walk, I love a jolly good stomp, I like camping, I like hiking, I like going into hills and mountains and opening the tent in the morning and saying, this is my view, I own this view, I've worked to get here. And then all these things started to come in. And my favourite things to hike in wintertime, lined trekking trousers. Just thinking about them now. Oh, yeah. Yep.
You've trekked all over the world, Penny, and a lot of treks with your very great friend Mariella Frostrup. Mm-hmm. Where are the most exciting places, do you think, that you've been to, and what's one of your sort of most exciting adventures, if you like?
Well, I suppose the big one was my accidental 2.5-year backpack in South America, Central and South America and Southeast Asia. Supposed to be for a year, went with a boyfriend. It was supposed to be just going through Mexico, down to the bottom, down to Argentina and Chile, and then coming back up again. And then coming back, we were both journalists. He was working on a national newspaper. I was on the Peterborough Evening Telegraph. And towards the end, we were both working all the hours. I was working also as a waitress in a restaurant on the evenings that I wasn't working for the newspaper. And I also worked in a paper shredding factory at weekends just to save up enough money to go for a year. And then after that year, we couldn't bear to stop. So we flew to Hong Kong and got jobs there at a time when you could, because it was still a British protectorate. And then we worked there for 8 months and then carried on backpacking for another year through the Philippines and Indonesia and Malaysia and all those sort of brilliant places at Burma, ending up in Sri Lanka from where we flew home. And then that's when I went on to Radio Trent, where I worked with a man called Dale Winton. Aww. So that was I suppose that was the really big time when I trekked, obviously trekking everywhere, trekked in Ecuador, we went up volcanoes, we went to so many incredible, extraordinary places. And then after we came back, I still wanted to carry on doing that. So then I've done more backpacking. And I suppose the one place that is perhaps the most recent in terms of a jolly good old stomp, as it were, was Bhutan. I can't think of anywhere else which is so unlike anything else, and any other place as well. That part of the Himalayas, so you're talking about everything being incredibly high, snow-capped peaks, goats scrambling about, people eking out a living in these harsh environments, and yet views that you could just keep on blinking, and in another heartbeat you had another, if your mind was just photographs, every single one of them would be worthy of a National Geographic photograph. There were 6 of us, and I got separated from the gang. I bent down to tie my shoelaces. It was snowing. It was a huge blizzard. And I bent down to tie my shoelaces. And by the time I stood up, they'd all disappeared. And the footsteps had wandered off and everything else. And there was a moment when I genuinely was slightly worried because I didn't have a map. I didn't have the map. So I did what we'd done when I got held up at submachine gun point whilst trekking in northern Thailand, which is that after we'd had everything taken and we had to make our way out, we'd done a little pile of stones. Every time we came to where a path diverged, we did a little pile of stones that was bigger from the way we'd come to the way that we went, so that if we were going round in circles, we'd know that we'd been there before and we needed to take a different route. And then luckily, it was an hour and a half later, I caught up with them and they had hurried along, and they genuinely thought I was behind, because you tend not to look behind too much. What a rookie error. I had not shouted to say, listen, I'm tying my shoelace. It might be a moment, because then I tied the other one as well, and it was freezing cold and my fingers were all frozen and I couldn't tie them properly. So I was redoing them. And of course, it's a rookie error. And that's the thing about those situations. You have to calm yourself down. And I think you do find inner strength. I was really scared at the beginning and then less scared as I was walking along, I think, because I suddenly thought about what I was going to do if I couldn't find them. And I knew that there was a satellite phone. I knew that as long as I kept on leaving little rocks and everything, they would know where I'd gone and that I could do a rudimentary bivvy in a place sheltered, etc. It's not something I'm proud of. It was an idiotic thing to do. Never do it again.
I'm sure once you knew you were safe, though, Penny, I bet you can look back at that moment where you must have felt like you were the only person in the world. Because
exactly.
The views in some of the places you've been to, I know, are just breathtaking. But I love the way you just rather sort of casually slipped in there when you were held up by a submachine.
No, 4 submachine guns.
What on earth happened?
No, 4 submachine guns.
So 4?
Yeah, 4 submachine guns. It wasn't
submarine guns, submachine guns.
Yeah, 4 submachine guns. That was another time when I was trekking again with 5 people. It was 5 people and a guide. And in both places we did have guides. I have done a lot of trekking without having guides, but never on my own, in fact, because I don't think that there's any view that isn't ultimately 100% better by being able to say to somebody else, that's great, isn't it? Look at that view. So I always have trekked with other people. And again, it was 6 of us. It was a 5-day hike and it was north of Chiang Rai. We were on day 3 of a 5-day trek. It was just beautiful. And as we came down the hill, somebody said, oh, what an odd place to do army manoeuvres. There were 4 blokes in combat fatigues and they were holding machine guns and they were on the path. And when I say the path, you know as well as I do, when you go trekking on these paths, they're not particularly wide paths. So it seemed like a perfectly reasonable thing that they'd be sitting there waiting with their guns to maybe for their friends to join them or whatever else. And it was only when they made the traditional noise of machine guns clicking into place that we realised that we were being held up. And our guide ran off. That wasn't terribly helpful.
Oh, gosh.
And we had everything taken and then they made us turn around. And we all thought at that point that it was me, another girl and 4 guys. And we all thought that this was the last moment on earth. And it was at that point that I thought, did I remember to tell my parents that I loved them in my last letter home? There were quite a few other things that happened on that day. We were all changed from that experience. We all did things differently. That was for me. It was from that moment on, I try really hard not to sweat the small stuff, I think is the expression, not to worry too much about a lot of things because we are so lucky to have been born in this country and to have what we have and to have the freedoms that we have. It didn't really matter about lack of jewellery that had gone. The little bit of money that we had, that was gone. We still were extraordinarily fortunate that we had other ways of getting by as soon as we managed to get to the next town. And obviously that was also slightly worrying. We'd had a guide when we went into that, and then we didn't have a guide, so we had no idea where we were going. Very fortunately, I
know. Ran off, isn't it? I think at least you'd be sort of okay with a guide. I know that most of your travels have not had as much drama as that.
No, they haven't.
The last on my list of 5 things Penny Smith can't live without is theatre. And you talked about how your mum used to take you to the ballet for your birthday when you were little.
That's right. So I grew up in Rutland and, I don't actually think there was a theatre in Rutland. There probably was, but we certainly didn't go to it. And my mum was from Nottinghamshire. She used to take me to Nottingham for my birthday to go and see the ballet. I think it was the Theatre Royal in Nottingham. I've never been a massive fan of toffees, but Mum is a fan of a toffee. She obviously told me not to unwrap them during the performance. So we had to either unwrap them beforehand or you'd get your mouth ready for them in the interval. And then we'd watch this ballet. And weirdly, as I've gone along, I was a massive opera fan even at 11. I used to go home having talked about something that was dead trendy at school about bands. And then I'd go home and put Joan Sutherland, The Art of the Prima Donna on and stomp around the house and sing. And I loved Aida and the Triumphal March and various other things. So I became a massive theatre and opera fan. And I very rarely see ballets nowadays. But there's something about a live performance. I don't think there's anything that quite makes my hair stand on end and makes me so connected as a live performance. It's all the other people. It's weird, isn't it? Because the other people can be seriously annoying, texting away these days or unwrapping sweets or chatting and so other people can be really irritating, but the shared experience is like no other. And I include football, for goodness sake. I've been to a few football matches. Sorry, no, doesn't come anywhere close. And you can almost guarantee it with opera. You can guarantee that even if the production isn't the best production you've ever seen, the singing will send you off in another direction. It's incredibly passionate. And sometimes it changes you as well. You sometimes look at something and go, now I understand about something.
So your Sunday nights on Scala Radio must be an absolute dream for you.
They are. Scala Radio, music, classical music for modern living, and it's very accessible. And I can't play my more operas. We've decided that we have to keep on assuming that people don't love it as much as I do. So you can still play Wagner, but you have to play the bits that people aren't going to go, whoa! Turn this off, turn this racket off. But it means that I can introduce people to the sort of things that I really enjoy. I did a little 4-week opera for beginners series as well, which I think you can probably still find on Scala Radio. You know, it's one of those scalaradio.co.uk. So you could even go and listen to that, because I do think it's about starting and it's about finding the things that connect you. Not everybody is ever going to love opera. My younger brother would prefer to stick pins in his eyes than go to an opera. And he really is not interested. He doesn't care or anything else. But I know quite a lot of my friends who've said, tell me which I should start with.
Sometimes it can be overwhelming, and I know you are very good at it. We were strolling on the South Bank together one day and you took me into a classical music shop, and I love classical music. And I remember saying to you, Penny, I just don't know where to begin. And you said, right, OK. And you scooted around and we came out with 5 CDs. And, you know, I was probably starting from quite well-known stuff. We'd probably got, you know, the Vivaldi's Four Seasons or whatever.
Yeah.
But you're very good at that. We've got a little clip from your radio show, so let's have a listen.
Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov is going to have the musical equivalent of a bedtime story for us in a minute here on Scala Radio. As I said earlier, it's based on a tale from the Arabian Nights. Shahryar finds out one day that his first wife has been unfaithful, so he resolves to marry a new person every day and behead the previous wife so that she couldn't be unfaithful. Do you know what? I don't remember being that bothered about this when I was a child. Anyway, he's killed 1001 wives by the time he's introduced to Scheherazade. She's wise, she's witty, she's well-read, she's well-bred, and she volunteers to spend one night in the king's chambers, and she starts to tell the king a tale. But then she stops in the middle and says that dawn is breaking and there's no more time. So her life is spared so that she can continue. The next night, she finishes that story and starts with another, and then breaks off because dawn is breaking. At the end of 1001 nights and 1000 stories, Scheherazade tells the king she has no more tales to tell, but he's fallen in love with her and makes her his queen.
It isn't just the music. There's a whole story behind it, isn't there? Other than just the story of perhaps the actual opera or the music itself.
It's the connection. It's like walking on cobbled stones and thinking all those hundreds of years of feet walking on those cobbled stones, wearing the stones down and wearing them shiny. And it's the same with opera and with all of the arts, all of culture. It's about connections. It's so funny, isn't it? Because take Britain a few years ago, they changed the way that they showed everything, and they stopped it being all about, for example, they'd put all the abstract paintings together at that point and they'd put all these other ones together, and then they decided to change it and do it by years so that you could see the progression and see how avant-garde some of the artists were compared to others, and how some were so stuck in one particular century and not in another. And it suddenly brought the whole thing to life. And knowledge as well is always helpful. Knowing that Wagner, for example, was writing the Ring Cycle at the same time as Verdi's La Traviata, one so terribly 19th century, one so hugely 20th century. And that's when you suddenly see the progression and the connection. And I also like knowing about the composers. Richard Wagner, for example, such an incredibly passionate man. Your wives weren't safe with him. I think I can probably put it that way. You just look at his life, and I think that also brings another angle into these things.
And you host your own weekend show on Talk Radio, which is another real vehicle for everything you love. I mean, I'm thinking of, you have lots of actors in the studio and you review books. I mean, it's great that after all these years as a broadcaster, you are able to share these passions with us, and it's your job.
Yeah, so producer and I have conversations throughout the week about what we might be doing at the weekend. And it always goes, this is a story about bees. Yep, I'm in that one. Yeah, let's have the bee one. And then I'll say, how about this one? And she'll say, oh, you and your little whatever it is. Nutrition. I love nutritional. I love stories about nutrition and food. And to be honest, there isn't a huge amount that I'm not awfully interested in, apart from football. I love the Olympics. But the rest of sport pretty much leaves me cold.
You didn't expect to like barging, did you, as much as you did in the south of France?
That was such good fun. And I made some proper friends on that as well. Celebrity 5 go barging for Channel 5. And I'd never driven a boat before. And it was such a massive boat. And it was me and Tessa Sanderson on one boat. And then Dermot Gavin and Tom Conti and Tony Christie on the other. So it's 3 blokes, one of whom had driven boats before, and me and the pair of novices on the other. And I crashed the boat on the first day into a load of trees. At least I didn't crash it into the lock, mind you, because somebody else crashed in a lock. And
no names will be mentioned.
No names will be mentioned at this point, exactly.
It was a lot harder work than you anticipated, wasn't it? Because I remember before you went, I think you thought you were going on a bit of a jolly to the south of France, but it wasn't quite like that, was it?
Yeah, but it was, all of those things. I mean, how lucky we have been able to do so many extraordinary things in our lives. Been asked to go on treks which have been organised for us. For example, you mentioned Mariella. We did a couple of those for charities. We get them organised for us, which is bliss in so many ways.
And you've been very kind because you got me inspired and motivated on the trekking front and lent me a lot of gear, including your sarong, which you won't let me go anywhere in the world without. I was like, I don't need a sarong.
You do need a sarong.
Oh, believe me, you do. Why do you need a sarong, Penny?
Everybody needs a sarong. A sarong is the one thing, it's the first into the bag, because a sarong can be used as a towel, as a cover-up, as something to sit on, as something to wrap around your hair, as something to put over your shoulders if you're going into a place where you suddenly need to have your shoulders covered. It is absolutely essential.
But also the most important thing that you told me it can be used for is for the outdoor wee. So, I think we'll leave it there. But Penny, thanks so much for having a romp through your life and career with us. It always makes me smile talking to you. We're going to leave you to nibble on a few carrots, get your rubber gloves on, do a spot of cleaning and maybe don a sock or two, all of course whilst listening to Wagner.
Oh, do you know what? That has really got me going. I think I might be doing a bit of Gotterdammerung, and I have got a sock that needs darning. Thanks for reminding me.
Pleasure. That was broadcaster Penny Smith. You can hear her every weekend morning on Talk Radio. And if you like a bit of classical and contemporary arts, then Sunday nights on Scala is for you. Thanks very much for joining me for this week's Convex Conversation. Do share the link, convex.podbean.com, with your friends and family, or you can find us on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts. Bye for now. Have a lovely week.